welcome to another episode of Soundtrack Talk, the podcast where I talk about games, soundtracks, and music. Today, I have my friend here with me, Stefan. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Stefan Rogers. I'm a cellist studying at VR and CM, and I'm going to talk about the music of Sea of Thieves today.
Sea of Thieves! So for people who perhaps have not played Sea of Thieves before, could you give a simple sort of summary of what the game's about?
Yes, so Sea of Thieves is an open world co-op PvPvE game.
Wait, what? PvPvE?
PvPvE.
PvPvE.
Oh,
Player versus enemy.
yeah, that's at least the way that they describe the game, they being they're the producers of the game. So you are placed, you can either form your own team out of your friends or be placed in a team crewing a ship of between 2 and 4 players on a open world map, kind of largely modelled off a kind of 1700s Caribbean aesthetic, but it's not based on any specific real life setting. It is just a kind of loose pirate theme.
Some general pirate vibes.
General pirate vibes, yeah. And so the basic aim is, as you'd expect in a pirate game, you need to get as much loot as you physically can. And as the name of the game would suggest, that can be through being a thief. So you can enter the PvP realm of the game, so to speak, and fight against other ships and sink them and steal their loot. But there's also NPCs in the game. Both can have their own ships or can just spawn randomly in the ocean or on islands that can have loot on them, but are mainly just a real nuisance.
So the composer for the music of Sea of Thieves is an English person called Robin Beanland, and he's also worked on titles like Donkey Kong 64, Sea of Thieves obviously, and even Super Smash Bros. He's worked on. Yeah,
Robin Beanland is the composer behind the Sea of Thieves soundtrack, which was released in 2018, although he had been in the business of writing a soundtrack for games for over 20 years at that point, with his first release being Donkey Kong Country in 1994. Sea of Thieves, the soundtrack is in some ways quite a unique one when compared to other games where you normally get a continuous loop of background music. You don't get this so much in Sea of Thieves.
It's only at certain important points.
Yeah. So an example of that is when you're approaching a new island or when a certain enemy spawns, you'd get a short, say, 5-10 second clip of music. Although you do in things like boss fights often get a kind of more continuous musical loop that is more similar to what you'd find in
of course,
other video games. Yeah.
Is it so in the boss fights is there there's a fight theme, right?
Yeah, and
of course.
I mean, as you find often in a lot of other video games, the intensity of the music builds up as you get closer to defeating said boss.
Another interesting thing about this soundtrack is that the composer deliberately sort of picked not the top-notch instruments that he could have picked, right? So he picked sort of not worse, but sort of more rustic-sounding instruments, right, to record the soundtrack.
In fact, I mean, there's a really, really good video that you can find on the Xbox official channel on YouTube, where Robin Beanland actually demonstrates the very instruments that he used when putting together the soundtrack for Sea of Thieves.
I'll put a link in the description to that video.
Excellent, yeah. A really specific example of him using not necessarily the best instrument is the concertina that he uses. So concertina, for those who don't know, it is basically a simplified version of an accordion. So it's already not the most refined instrument that you get. But he, in this interview, talks about how he went to a music shop and basically picked out the worst example of one of these that he could find in order to have an instrument that sounds like it's used something that's been battered, that's been thrown around a pirate ship for many years.
Yeah.
And isn't really used in any kind of professional setting. It's
of course.
just a casual thing to entertain one another when on a long voyage or trying to raise an anchor.
Yeah, it really adds to the vibes and the whole general atmosphere.
Yeah.
Because thinking about it, it would feel really out of place if the music was just sort of professional studio orchestra recording.
Yeah, and whilst you do get some of that kind of more professional studio orchestra kind of music in, say, the boss battles, the use of these more rustic instruments is far more common, and you can hear it not only in, say, shops and buildings as you walk around the map, but there's a very unique mechanic to Sea of Thieves where you can, in your inventory, select out of several options a particular instrument. So you can either play as aforementioned concertina,
of course,
then a hurdy-gurdy, a banjo, or a drum, which is by far the most civilized of all of those instruments.
I love how the soundtrack actually uses a hurdy-gurdy.
Yeah.
It's great. You barely even see them in the other games.
It's quite
and
funny
other
because, I mean, hurdy-gurdies wouldn't have been historically used on a ship, but that's really creative license directly from Robin Beanland that has gone into the mechanics of the game to use this not necessarily authentic instrument, but an instrument that he felt kind of captured the sound world, the atmosphere of this very kind of rustic pirate lifestyle.
Of course, yeah. Also, on the so when your character picks an instrument to play, can't you like build up a sort of tune and sort of ensemble with all of the other characters that you're playing with?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the really kind of interesting parts of this mechanic where you can choose your instrument. I mean, as it's a team game, you're playing with several other pirates on your ship, and indeed you can actually form alliances with other ships and effectively make an even bigger crew. You can add more layers to the music with this mechanic. So the first person could start playing a tune, and then as each other person joins, they play another layer of harmony, and they can do this on different instruments, and you can really create a very kind of strangely individual sound just playing with friends on a piece of music that you pre-selected out of a menu of 20 or so different tunes.
I feel like this also really adds to the sort of gameplay because it encourages you to like work together as a team with your friends and sort of encourages the cooperative gaming rather than just playing by yourself. You know, even if it's just a tiny thing, having this little Easter egg of being able to make your own ensemble that's sort of tailored to your characters is quite cool.
And it's actually, from a gameplay perspective, something that can be often quite useful, say, when encountering another player ship.
All right.
Before you actually, say, board another ship, you can actually start playing some music, and then it's almost an indication to other people that actually you're not going to be aggressive, you're not going to try and kill them and steal your loot, but instead you want to team up.
Yeah, that's fair. So, in the game, aren't there different factions as well, and sort of each faction having their own motif and something like that?
Yeah, so
there are 4 factions.
Effectively, there's actually more than 4.
I was wrong.
There's technically 5 off the top of my memory, which are Gold Hoarders, Order of Souls, Merchants, Reapers, Athenas, and Hunter's Call.
You didn't mention Athena's or Hunter's Call to me before.
I didn't mention Hunter's Call or Athena's in our meeting we had before now. And that's because Hunter's Call and Athena's kind of serve a slightly different mechanic of the game, where Hunter's Call is basically just profiteering off a mini game, which is you can fish from like just in the game, standing on the side of your ship, something to do, pass the time, and the fish you catch, you can eat it or you can sell it for Hunter's Call, but when you sell it, it's not really something that's going to get you so much money, and the rewards you get from working with the Hunter's Call aren't really anything similar to what you get with Reapers, Order of Souls, Gold Hoarders, or Merchants.
Is it almost like a mini faction then?
Yeah, effectively. And then Athenas are basically, they're more like a standard faction, but they're a bit more like an exclusive club for people who've been playing the game way too long. Where basically you need to reach level 50 with 3 other factions in order to be allowed to work for them. But effectively the main factions are Gold Hoarders, Order of Souls, Merchants, and Reapers. Out of those 4, though, I'm sounding like a real nerd right now, but
that's okay, we all are.
Out of those 4, Reapers are somewhat different, whereas the other 3, you can basically sign up to, in a gaming session, sign up to work for, say, Gold Hoarders or Merchants or Order of Souls. You can sign up to represent them, which means that the treasure that's relevant to them will get you more money when it's sold. Whereas Reapers is a bit different because it profiteers off PvP, so when you sign up to them, you can get more money off all treasure as long as that treasure is stuff that you have stolen from another ship.
So like the sort of enemies in the game that are actually controlled by other people.
Yeah. So basically it's for Call of Duty players.
Ah, I see.
But yeah, in terms of the music for these 3 well, it's really relevant to all of the factions that I've mentioned, including Hunter's Call and Athena's. They have their own kind of music, which exists in short snippets for when you go in their shops or you sell some treasure to them. They each have their own kind of sound, effectively. So with Merchants, for example, it's basically harpsichord music. It sounds quite upper class, and it's very matching with the aesthetic of the Merchant Alliance, which kind of digs on this old aristocratic empire kind of design. Whereas with the Reapers, for example, it's a lot more kind of atmospheric, almost Hollywood-esque style music, played on less conventional instruments, which kind of matches this kind of weird, almost cult-like, I'm tempted to say business, but not really business entity in the world. Of course.
I feel like the main adjective I would use to describe all the music is just really inventive.
Yeah, even from like how they approach music at the start, it's quite unique when compared to other games. It's not necessarily like this is the soundtrack to a game. Instead, it's loads of kind of small elements that have been incorporated into the wider game in order to basically create more atmosphere. And
I think having a soundtrack like that almost makes it more memorable in a way, because it sort of ingrains it in your mind. So if you're like, oh, I'm going to a shop owned by whatever faction, it's sort of, you always hear it. Rather than,
Yeah.
if there was a field theme, for example, if there was just a constant theme that was playing whenever you were just on the ocean, I feel like that could also get a bit boring, and it also wouldn't sort of tell the story as well as having just snippets at important places.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way of describing it. I mean, it's
This
all
reminds
about really
me.
the atmosphere.
Yeah, this reminds me of another game. It reminds me of Breath of the Wild for the Wii U and the Switch, because a lot of Zelda fans were actually also quite annoyed at the lack of a field theme, seeing as there's always, in all the previous Zelda games, there's been an overworld field theme that was just playing all the time, sort of the main theme. There was not one in Breath of the Wild, which I liked that, though, because sometimes when you are just aimlessly wandering around, like, you don't need to have a soundtrack to that. It's only when you sort of do important things to the story that the important bits of the soundtrack come in and sort of help set the scene of whatever town you're visiting or whatever island you're going to.
Yeah, I mean, it's when looking at the how the producers would have approached the game, it's quite a brave move deciding, actually, you know what, we're not going to have for the majority of the game any music whatsoever.
Definitely.
And only use snippets. It's kind of almost reminiscent of, say, Alfred Hitchcock with Psycho, who in the famous shower scene, Alfred Hitchcock actually wanted it to be completely silent.
Oh yeah, of course.
But Bernard Herrmann
said no.
had other thoughts and managed to convince him otherwise. And in that case, by adding the music, created one of the most iconic moments in cinema history. Whereas this, it's kind of the opposite.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, because for some games, it works a lot better if there is sort of a field theme constantly going on.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I can't imagine, say, a Mario game would feel anywhere near
of course.
Interesting if you were only listening to Mario jumping and collecting coins.
Yeah. So, relatively recently, not extremely recently, but like, there's been a big update in the game where they've sort of partnered with Disney, doing sort of a collaboration with the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, and this has also impacted the music in the game. But just as a quick explanation, this update involved sort of missions and quest lines and stuff like that, which are sort of related to the characters in Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah, so I mean, actually, effectively from the release date of Sea of Thieves, there was somewhat of a story mode that kind of ran off the plot line of discovering what happened in the Sea of Thieves, which is the world you play in, before it became what it was, which is the pirate game that we know and love. And this is through what they called Tall Tales, which were effectively missions that you didn't necessarily do to get more money, because they didn't actually give you much in the way of loot, but they more were to discover about the world. And you'd often unlock kind of cosmetic items like a new outfit or a new paint scheme for your ship in this. But in June last year, June 2021, the developers at Rare released probably the largest update the game has had so far, titled A Pirate's Life. And they did this, as they do with a lot of their updates, basically out of the blue, with only about a week's notice of the update. So it built quite a lot of hype for both players and people who had never played the game before, and actually brought quite a lot of new faces to the game. And in this, A Pirate's Life update, you get basically introduced to a new mechanic of being able to go through portals into a new kind of world, a Sea of the Damned, where, surprise, surprise, Captain Jack Sparrow has got trapped. And Sea of the Damned used to be, before then, just a very small mechanic where if you died, you went to the Ferry of the Damned for 30 seconds or so that you wouldn't respawn immediately, which meant that there was actually some risk to dying when in, say, a PvP situation.
Yeah.
But they kind of elaborated on this and created an entire new kind of storyline by combining the world they had created and the world that was created by Disney with Pirates of the Caribbean. And in doing so, they did likewise with the music. So you do hear some Pirates of the Caribbean music, you see some Sea of Thieves music in this world, but a lot of the time you're actually hearing a combination of the two.
Yeah.
So entirely new music that has been formed from themes that you'd hear in either Sea of Thieves or Pirates of the Caribbean combined together. And in this new world, actually, you do get a fair bit more of this kind of background field music, as you describe it, going on, kind of to build this atmosphere of this creepy underworld with all of its kind of weird ancient towns that have been here for longer than people can remember, with pirates of the souls of pirates from generations past have residing in. Yeah.
Very spooky.
Spooky indeed. So, that as a whole was a very big update and very new direction for the game. And there's been quite a lot of, in the community, there's been quite a lot of speculation as to whether the developers will try a similar thing in the future, or whether they'll actually build on this kind of new world, all these new mechanics that were added by this colossal update.
Wait, when you say
integrate it more,
try a similar thing in the future, do you mean they have plans to sort of collaborate with another?
Well, both whether they'll collaborate again and whether they will add kind of more realms, more dimensions to the game. Whereas at the moment you effectively have two. You have the Sea of Thieves, and then you have this weird kind of Sea of the Damned, which is only really relevant to
this update.
The Pirates of the Caribbean update. Yeah.
This is all speculation, by the way. Nothing has actually been confirmed.
Yeah.
Oh.
Cool.
So speaking of the atmospheric music in the Sea of the Damned, doesn't the composer also use like a lot of extended techniques to sort of make it more atmospheric than would be usually used in a sort of filmed soundtrack or more quote-unquote normal sort of sounding game soundtrack?
Yeah, so actually if we look at where this update is kind of based for Sea of the Damned, the kind of more unusual music stems from the same kind of map area, only in this case before this update existed. So as I mentioned, you have this Ferry of the Damned where you go if you die in the game for a short period of time before respawning. This was kind of before the Pirate's Life update, only real part of the map that had continuous field music of a sort where it wasn't, say, more kind of tonal, almost historically informed rustic music that you'd find in the main map. It was kind of a lot more mysterious, unusual, and the way how Robin Beanland uses instruments in this is reflective of it. So whereas you'd normally get, say, hurdy-gurdies, concertinas, all fairly kind of regular standard instruments, here he often uses instruments that we might normally refer to as normal, but he doesn't use them in the normal way. So uses things like bowed cymbals.
Love bowed cymbals.
And I mean, as a string player, I can talk for days about this, but he uses lots of extended techniques in string instruments.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're both string players, so...
Yeah, so a really obvious one is solo ponticello, as it's called.
Oh, yeah.
which means when talking about bowed instruments, you can do this technique on plucked instruments, but the effect is completely different. On bowed instruments, if you play closer to the bridge, so the end of the strings, it creates a very kind of strange metallic kind of noise.
It's very effective when used properly, because it is like a massive difference to how string instruments usually sound.
It's a completely different colour. I mean, it's kind of not really a noise you'd expect to hear out of a violin or cello or double bass.
Or a viola.
We don't talk about those. So he uses quite a lot of that, and then there's also a fair bit of polenio, which is where you hit the strings with the stick of the bow, so not rubbing the strings, without a better word to describe it, with the hairs of the bow as you'd normally play. But
fully just banging on the strings with the wood on the bow.
Whack. And it's something that's also very effective, and you can hear in really famous pieces of classical music such as Gustav Holst's Mars.
Oh yes.
Although string players in general really don't like doing
really dislike doing it,
because
especially if they have a nice bow.
it can cause damage to your instrument.
Use sparingly.
And the third one that he uses quite regularly in this is overpressure, where you effectively play normally by
but you press really hard with the bow
across the string, but you just press down really hard, and it makes this kind of creaking, horrible, loud noise.
It's not pleasant to listen to.
It's almost like listening to a really old door being opened slowly, only about 10 times louder.
I assume... Oh, sorry.
No, go on.
I assume that's probably used to sort of represent like the old creaking wood of the ships or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes sense to think of it like that.
Yeah, and he does use some of these effects in the overworld as well. However, this isn't so much as part of the main soundtrack of the music. This is more purely sound effect. So, for example, the ship creaking, things getting hit by cannonballs. A lot of the time, it's being made through extended techniques on different musical instruments, whether it being strings, percussion, woodwind, brass, you name it.
So these extended techniques are actually being used to like create sound effects from the game?
Yep.
Instead of like making a set like from a sound effect library or something?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
There are, and there's obviously some sound effects that they are using straight from the sound effects library. However, actually, a lot of the sounds they create are done bespokely for the game, and they can be done, as I said, through extended techniques on standard instruments, or they can just be done through, say, throwing a stone into a bucket of water or something like that.
Yeah. Cool. So that's Sea of Thieves. Thank you for listening to this episode of my podcast. You can follow me at Soundtrack Talk on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Many thanks to Stefan for joining me. Do you want to sort of promote anything?
At the moment, I think I'm good. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, smash that notification bell.
No, don't do that. Just, wherever you get your podcasts, you can find Soundtrack Talk. Thanks again for listening. I will see you again soon.
Goodbye.
Bye.